You mentioned FedRAMP a little bit ago. What are the major differences between, let's say, CMMC and FedRAMP? I know we've mentioned that NIST SP 800-171 is what CMMC is based off. FedRAMP's based off NIST SP 800-53. What are the differences really between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but it's I guess from a initial perspective, you can think of FedRAMP is very system focused, it's service offering focused, it's worried about the container, and CMMC is a lot more data driven. So there's a lot of more scoping nuances that come with the CMMC program, but like you said, it is a lot less prescriptive, right? So you have that NIST 853, which is that huge catalog of security controls that are required for FedRAMP. And what 171 was it was an initial tailoring of that 853 that was really focused on protecting the confidentiality of CUI. So it took a lot of the confidentiality aspects of 853, a little bit of the integrity, and I think just like a sprinkle of availability to make those 110 controls. So you can kind of think of it as a very slimmed down version of the 853.
Is there a tie-in to FedRAMP at all for services I use for CMMC?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DFAR 7012 clause is, this is something that I said has been around for a while, but essentially if you're using a cloud service offering to store, process, or transmit CUI, then it has to be FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. So we see a lot of organizations that kind of just see FedRAMP and then they don't realize that there's all these different classifications and all these different levels of FedRAMP, of like LISAS and high and things like that. But the minimum that service that you have to be using is something like a FedRAMP moderate. And now I know the FedRAMP moderate equivalency is something that has also come up a lot. And essentially what that is it's if I think a lot of organizations pursue FedRAMP moderate equivalency if they're not able to get a sponsor with the government to sponsor that actual FedRAMP moderate base assessment. So a memo that was released by, I believe it was Ellen Lord in December of 2023, if I'm not mistaken, sort of laid out the equivalency requirements, and it's essentially you have to meet 100% of the FedRAMP moderate baseline, which is a very tall task for a lot of service offerings.
323 controls.
Yes. Yeah. So it's very difficult, and there's all the kind of caveats that come with the FedRAMP assessments, like the FIPS 199 categorization, that body of evidence, your vulnerability scans, things like that. So it's a very difficult standard for these service offerings to meet.
So when they get an equivalency, is that still assessed by like a showman at that point to prove that they're equivalent?
Yeah, so the service offering will go to a 3PAO, not a C3PAO, so they're a little different because the 3PAOs are the FedRAMP assessors and the C3PAOs are the CMMC assessors. So Shellman, we do both sides of the house there, but essentially that service offering will go to a 3PAO. We'll conduct that equivalency assessment and basically put together the service offering will put together that body of evidence, we'll assess it, and then it's on the contractor to validate that body of evidence is meeting the FedRAMP equivalent memo. And that's subject to checks by the DIBCAC. So it's a very complicated kind of nuanced process to reach that equivalency and to make sure that it's useful and validated.
But that's just for, if I'm the contractor, that's just for the services I use have to meet that. So if I'm using a particular service, they have to be, that would have the information, the CUI,
yes,
controlled unclassified information, yep, is going onto a third-party system. I need to make sure they have FedRAMP moderate or a FedRAMP moderate equivalent.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it's something that we see a lot of contractors. I don't know if it's struggle with as much, but they don't. I feel like it's not as fleshed out because it's still a new process for people that are doing this as federal contractors, right? Mm-hmm. So people that have kind of been in the FedRAMP space and they sort of know how those engagements go, where you bring in and you lift out all of your service providers, what level are they at, kind of that. I believe it's I think it's the SA9 control where it's the external services. So essentially, it's part of the CMMC process, and one of the things that has come with the 32 CFR rule is that you have to include the service providers. So you have your cloud service providers, so you have to show that, your cloud service providers that you're using, you have to list them in your SSP, you have to bring in those customer responsibility matrices, and kind of delineate where the security responsibilities for each of the controls that you're considering, because you can inherit controls from those cloud service providers, but that doesn't mean that you inherit from them 100%. It's only the applicable controls. So there's still things that you may need to consider and configure and implement and things like that. So it's a very nuanced category.